So what my English name is Lindsay Delaronde. I am currently the Indigenous Resurgence Coordinator for the Fine Arts Department at the University of Victoria. This is our first interview series called the Blue Heron series, inspired by the Blue Heron, that reminds us to self-reflect, to share dignity and compassion. And at this time, we're going to be interviewing different artists and curators, knowledge keepers about Indigenous art, in relation to the Academy and outside of the Academy as well. So our first guest that we have here today is Ryan Rice. Ryan Rice is Kanienkehá of Kahnawake. He is an independent curator and is currently the acting dean in the Faculty of Liberal Arts, School of Interdisciplinary Studies at the Ontario College of Art and Design. His curatorial career spans 25 years in museums, artist-run centers, and galleries. Rice served as the chief curator at the IAIA Museum of Contemporary Native Arts, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and also held curatorial positions at the Indigenous Art Centre, Ottawa. He's also named curatorial fellowships with the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, Victoria, BC, and the Walter Phillips Gallery in Banff, Alberta, and Aboriginal Curator-In-Residence at the Carleton University Art Gallery. He received a Master's of Arts degree in Curatorial Studies from the Center of Curatorial Studies, Bard College, New York graduate from Concordia University with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in printmaking, and received an Associate of Fine Arts from the Institute of American Indian Arts. Rice's writing on the contemporary Onkwehonwe art has been published in numerous periodicals and exhibition catalogues, and he has lectured widely. Some of his exhibitions include Anthem, Perspectives on Home and Native Land, Flying Still, Carl Beam, 1943-2005, So Iroquois, Scout's Honor, Lore, Hochelaga Revisited, Alternation, Soul Sister, Reimagining Kateri Tekakwitha, Counting Coop, Standing with the Fists, Contemporary Native Women Artists and Articulations in Print. In the fall of 2017, he presented the award-winning inaugural exhibition of the new Onsite Gallery in Toronto with his exhibition, Raise a Flag, work from the Indigenous Arts Collection 2000 to 2015, and is currently touring a solo exhibition, Bait, Couzyn van Heuvelen, through 2020. Rice's service to community, leadership, and organizational experience includes co-founder and former director of the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective and Art Gallery of Ontario's Education Council, the Inuit Art Foundation, and 2 terms on the Native American Art Studies Association Board of Directors, among others. Wow, that's a real handful there. That's a big span career. So again, thank you for taking the time to just have this conversation in regards to, you know, your experience. I think taking a step back and really reflecting on maybe the first question of, in your experience, where does the spirit of Indigenous art, where do you find it? And where have you really experienced the spirit of our work? If that's an opening question we can talk about.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, to reflect on that as someone who no longer includes artists on their bio. I take in all those experiences and foundations that I was trained as an artist to move me forward in the way that I proceed within my work now as a curator or as an administrator. So where did Indigenous art come from? I guess it was about curiosity. Curiosity, trying to find something unique to our identity in Kahnawake.
All right.
Trying to see the experience of an artist or hearing about the art school in Santa Fe, just being creative in terms of you know, having a desire to be an artist or to be something creative. Right. And how do you pursue that, you know, in a community that wasn't the forefront, or that wasn't at the front of anyone's clear concerns, I would say. So recognizing who was the artist at the time.
Interesting. Yeah.
Probably was probably one of a key part in trying to understand what an artist was or who an artist is. And tracing back those ideas or memories or just navigating Kahnawake to some extent and trying to figure out where the creativity was.
Right.
I think one of the key examples in my sort of like developing a creative practice was probably at Kanienkehá.
Okay.
Where Mr. Vachon, I don't know if you were a student when he was there. So he took in myself and Robin Delaronde.
Oh yes, yeah.
For some reason he chose us, and we did an after school activity where we met, I don't know how many times a week, and he taught us how to do puppets. And we would do this kind of work and walk home after school, and it was this moment that was sort of like triggering in terms of picking up scissors, paper, paint, making something, thinking of a story, moving that forward. And then in high school, I was consistently attracted to the art classes rather than a lot of the other ones, but then pursued understood it not to be a career trajectory.
Right. Yeah.
So, along with peer pressure, everyone was saying you don't go to art school.
Right.
And we didn't know anybody who went to art school.
Yeah. It's interesting.
We didn't know anyone who was a professional artist. We knew people who were craftspeople.
Right.
And the youth center played an important role, the Kahnawake Youth Center, because it allowed us to go there and make things.
Right.
So we learned loom work at an early, in elementary or higher.
Right.
We did beadwork. We made things in that second floor.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Activity room. And I mean, that was aside from sports, getting in trouble, the library, and whatever activities we were doing there. So
I love that though, because it talks about the curiosity as being part of the spirit, and I think that inquiry that you've kind of taken forward, and really grounding your practice in Kahnawake, I think, versus primarily, right? Like really those identities of an iron worker or a tobacco seller, or just what isn't available for everybody who lives on reserve, and that feeling that limitation probably. And it's interesting because that mentorship was available for you and Robin too, just in like a phenomenon of timing. Yeah, that's really neat. Yeah.
And I think that the Catholic Church played a key role in curiosity.
Right.
I mean, given the fact that we resisted going to church on Sundays.
Yeah.
When we had to.
Yeah.
And trying to keep yourself busy. So the paintings on the ceiling were incredible. Paintings in those, I can see them now, the paintings in the church. And also, your Baba would take us behind into the museum. There was actually a museum. Like, who knew there was a museum?
Right.
Where we would, it was it was artifacts. But also there was a relic, a bone of Kateri there.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So there was these visual displays to look at.
Right.
That were quite, intriguing, interesting. It was Italian histories on the wall and Catholicism all around us in that church.
Right.
But the way I seen it, I guess, was as art.
Right. And it's interesting because the exhibitions that you went to curate, in your career were really focused on Kanienkehá, Mohawk, Iroquois centered, really looking at that artifact, the anthropological perspective of our artwork. you know, because it varies from territory to territory. So your practice was really grounded in understanding. What I saw was, what does it mean to be Onkwehonwe? You know, like when you don't grow up with the songs or you don't grow up with the language, then what else is available for us? And I think as artists, as creators, as that curiosity and that inquiry continues, I think it's bringing the history through that anthropological lens, and also these young influences and experiences, and kind of shaping and molding a career, like you said, that wasn't, you know, highly sought after as a career, but you've made a career.
Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, it's a lot of labor that went into pursuing this, you know, this practice that I really, you know, had a desire to pursue. But I think it's also, you know, reflective of identity of the times.
Right.
Kahnawake was shifting. There was a lot of stuff happening that, you know, when they got rid of the police, there was a lot of action, you know,
right.
consistent action that was taking place, and the reclamation of sort of a Kanien'kehá identity, right?
Yeah.
Specific to Kahnawake. So I think one of the things that I'm really interested is when is that moment when you realize kind of who you are? Like, when did we realize Kahnawake was different than Chattagee? Like, we seen it,
right.
But when did we realize we were different? You know, we knew that, you know, the French, the English, the communities next to us, but when did we really understand that we weren't, you know, we weren't white?
We weren't white, yeah.
Or we weren't the other.
We weren't the other.
We're always Mohawk, but what did that actually mean?
And not just through racism and prejudice. Like, that's one avenue of feeling like the other, or feeling like you don't belong, that you're separated from the majority, feeling like a minority. But I think what you're really talking about is that more of that identity connection, you know, more of that spiritual connection. Really interesting. Do you have a moment where this happened for you, or a few moments, or something, an accumulation?
Well, I think some of the key moments is like when the walkout happened at Howard S. Billings, and survival school started the next day.
Right.
And participating that, walking home with Graham from Chattagee, with all the other families, and seeing how things changed from there. But also, you know, like, you know, your mother and my sisters going to school in Chattagee to Billings, you know, hearing some of those experiences, which good and bad, whatever, you know, they are, but, you know, that's where you see that there's a border, that you're from one side and there's people on the other.
Right.
And I think that, I mean, I think it's normal also to reject that identity. So you go through that phase, and I think one of the key moments is when I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts. I think that maybe the art foundations weren't as significant as I probably thought they should have been. Okay. But I think it was to be in an environment with other people you didn't have to explain yourself to.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So when, you know, you're from a reserve or reservation, you're from Kahnawake, you didn't have to do this full, you didn't have to give a history of the planet to them.
Totally. And what the Academy really continues to do to Indigenous people, it's that continuation of, well, who are you? And influence from government and status and non-status, on reserve, off reserve. And then I think that's what you're talking about, is once you got into New Mexico, and you've engaged with many Indigenous artists, like even outside of Canada, you've cultivated and nourished these dialogues, and you're part of this weaving total understanding of Indigenous arts in Canada. Can you talk a little bit about your experience and how that shaped you in these relationships, and the crucialness of that and the preciousness of nation to nation. I've heard you say this many times in interviews, is that importance of nation building.
Well, I think that's what my 2 years at the Institute sort of created, was this opportunity to claim an identity around people that you had there was a common ground because you're all creative people.
Right.
So people understood what happened when you picked up a paintbrush. People understood what happened when you're in the dark room. You know, there was a lot of you know, that those creative moments, those moments where everyone is just making, was something that you didn't find in your particular community. But I think that has changed.
Right.
You know, I think there's a lot of creativity happening in Kahnawake in particular that we see on Facebook, and there's people making culture.
Yes.
So that was a key moment, is just finding the comfort to be who you want to be, but also the sort of reassurance that making a painting is part of your life.
Right.
And developing the skills. So I gravitated towards pottery and printmaking.
Right. Yeah.
And you know, those became part of what I did, and I still use those techniques even within administrative work.
Wow. Yeah. Right on. Cool. Maybe something else, kind of even a little bit further, because I really love how you just spoke about, in the entry, we talked about the spirit of the work and then the actual making of the work, where I think that's where you really experience the spirit of it all, is when you're actually in this process of making, and you're working alongside other artists, other knowledge keepers, and having that mutual shared understanding of like artist to artist. What's been your experience as a traveler, as a mover across the nation, in your role as curatorial practice, as Indigenous theorist, almost, you know, with you're weaving, like I said, a lot of these ideas into publication, exhibition, the presentation of this knowledge coming forward. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, I guess going back to that sort of like comment about nation to nation, I think traveling allows you to actually experience that. And the travel pushes you out of your comfort zone, especially if you're a young student, you know, making that leap to go somewhere. Before that, I went to Champlain and Lennoxville, where a lot of people have gone from Kahnawake before me. And also that pushed our community out a little further, but with a safety net, because we knew that other generations went there.
Exactly.
And sort of established a significant Kahnawake community there too.
Right.
Then you take yourself out of that and go somewhere even more like foreign.
Right.
Finding your way there allows you to establish respect for another nation.
Right.
Because you're no longer within your territory or your home, so learning those histories are critical, I find, and I carry that forward in my work, because I find that in order to know, in order to do any of the work that any of us does, you need to know where you are. Without that, you're lost. If you don't have a grounding somewhere, if you don't know the history of where you are, then there's something missing.
Right.
And you're only on the surface. So how do you establish connections?
Right.
Especially when you either choose not to live in your home community anymore.
Well, that's a lot of people's experience, especially within the institution. You know, University of Victoria, it's you know, I think this year was at 1,500 Indigenous students for enrollment last year. And so, you know, the capacity to hold in terms of all infrastructure, the courses being delivered, the support for Indigenous students of that transition. We had a fine arts student who was transitioning from Quebec, northern Quebec, coming to the University of Victoria, and culture shock, and, you know, all of these different ways of life and living. Each territory has their own rhythm and pace. And so my experience at the university, when we're looking at indigenizing the academy, really was birthed in the Indigenous education realm, you know, and then how other now departments with the TRC, the report, the call out, the Indigenous plan that's being implemented in all universities across the nation. How would you say that your role in OCAD is really being able to manifest some of those calls to action in a tangible way? Have you experienced that? Have you been part of that?
Yeah, well, this role that I'm sitting in now and associate dean is actually the first role I've ever had that's not a non-Indigenous job.
Wow.
Yeah, or named.
Right.
It's not a named Indigenous position.
Right.
So I've always worked very closely in terms of developing whatever I needed to develop with very specificity, whether that's local, national, or international. In this case, the capacity has grown where that's not my role anymore. So I have to let somebody else take that role on.
Right.
And at OCAD, through a cluster hire and establishing opportunities for faculty to come on board, we have close to probably 9 Indigenous faculty at OCAD.
Right.
The faculty. So me shifting into a different position sort of shifts my focus from the specificity of trying to develop Indigenous support. However, because the Indigenous Visual Culture program sits under my faculty, I work very closely, and I sort of know the history of how to move it forward, right?
Right. So in some ways, the Indigenous roles, we could feel quite limited in that capacity, and then kind of removing ourselves out and having a different position, I think, to tackle some of these big questions that are not new. You know, they're 10 years in the making around decolonization and indigenizing the academy, and hence why my role was birthed, the Indigenous Resurgence Coordinator, kind of navigating these conversations. But I think it's really important for the faculty who are going to be viewing this conversation to really see diversity in the way that academy has taken on, you know, these calls. And I think that's where the struggle is for faculty as well, looking at curriculum.
Yeah, I think it's the labor that's usually assigned to one person. So when I got to the university, I was the only Indigenous faculty there. The other person was on sabbatical. So I was basically trying to figure out how to manage this program kind of on my own, or with the support of admin assistant, but to develop a program. And I guess in one way it's good because you sort of have the space to do the work that you believe needs to get done.
Yeah.
But also keeping in mind that somebody has actually planted those seeds and that you want to make sure they go forward in a good way. So I think that, given that it's a young program, there's been significant work in terms of establishing and growing an Indigenous program that has been well supported by the university.
Nice. Yeah.
So that's the other plus about working within this institution, is that the battles have been different. Whereas as a curator trying to get into these art institutions, if you look at the history, there was very limited people working within these art institutions. And then I moved from an art institution into a university where there's a welcome mat for me to come and do some work.
Interesting.
So that, for me, that's why I was very optimistic about moving into this direction.
Right.
And also recognize that education is a major factor of art and design.
Okay.
So how do we combine all of these together? Because Indigenous art carries so much with it.
Totally. Yeah.
And we need to, in some ways, divorce it from a Western construct.
Right.
And elevate it as a form of continuity.
Awesome. Yeah. How have you experienced that disconnect from the Western kind of construct of what art is, what Indigenous art is? Where would you say what has to be teased out? Like, can you identify that? Because I think that's a big question for people in positions like yours and for the academy to really. For example, my master's program in counseling was learning all Western theory of counseling and then looking at Indigenous communities and seeing if it was going to be a fit or not. Mm-hmm. So we were still upholding Western ideologies of healing through a Western construct, but we're Indigenous people. So there's always this overcoding or imposing, or Indigenous knowledge is just a side thing. But I really like what you're talking about is totally a separation. It's a whole ideology, epistemology of itself that has its own history, its own culture, its own rhythm, tone, and pace, and has the people to, I think, affirm that continuously. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I gravitate towards working with Indigenous art. And I make no claims that I'm not interested in not working with Indigenous art.
Right.
People may feel that is a limitation, and I don't feel that at all. I feel that it really excites me because it carries so much wealth, and wealth that allows things to be reconsidered, wealth that allows people to reconnect,
right,
and wealth that allows things to have spirit.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
So how do we move things and not want them to mimic everything else?
Right.
Because our stories are unique. To have our experiences presented are unique. So it is a very different trajectory for someone to go down on a path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you think about how much time goes into burnishing a steel plate, and what are your thoughts going into that?
Right.
And you go back into making a basket, and what are the stories that are being told there? Going back to Deborah Dockstader's quote in Basket Bead Quill is like, all that time you're doing the work is contemplating knowledge, right? And where does that knowledge come from? And if that knowledge comes from somewhere, the thing that I like about artists is that they're moving the knowledge forward. How do you use something in a different way? How do you use the style but change it and transform it?
Totally.
The image behind us is an example of work moving forward, but also maintaining a significant connection.
Exactly.
To culture.
Exactly.
To culture, yeah.
Yeah, I think the leadership, if we could really see and acknowledge exactly what you're talking about and the power of what Indigenous art can do, not just for an arts world, but also fundamentally our human being, our leadership qualities. When that word resurgence is really important, because I think in my own practice with performance, it's really about resurging that knowledge, from the position, from the time, from the person that I am today, and always going back, but always moving it forward. So I think, it's a large conversation, and I don't think the opposition of its value is in question as much as it has been in the past. Can you see that in terms of the receiving audience of non-Native people understanding and engaging with art? Have you seen a shift and change in your career?
Yeah, the shift is incredible. I also worry that were at the moment of being considered mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that going to do? Because I've always been working against sort of the systems.
Right.
What happens when I'm now working in the system?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like when, you know, it's like in a 25 to 30 year career, I've seen the significant shifts that the doors were significantly closed,
Right.
to where the doors are wide open right now. And
Right.
it's a you know, it makes me nervous.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that nervousness is part of seeing Indigenous art as a sacredness, you know, the relational aspect of it. Like if the door is wide open, which means it's a larger capacity for anyone coming in, you know, anyone coming through. And I think that's something that people have been scrutinized for, in terms of, you know, what is your relationship to community, which community has accepted you when we identify as Indigenous, and even how Indigenous has, you know, the leverage, but it also could put a person in position for question as well. When you said, you know, the doors are wide open now. And I feel that as well, you know, when I see people, you know, that are highlighted, and I'm like, who are they? You know, where are they coming from? Where are they connected to? And I think it's a natural inquiry, but it's also the responsibility of it being an Indigenous artist too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, red flags go up, and you start Googling right away, and, you know, sending
Mm-hmm.
out questions, and do you know this person? And I mean, because the other thing is, as a curator, I want to know who's out there, and to keep my finger on what's actually happening. So when you see a new artist, you're like,
Yeah.
you know, where are they coming from? Where is their practice based? Who are they? And the minute there's no clear indication is where you're like, what's
Right.
going on here?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess especially within Haudenosaunee, when somebody actually, you know, puts that down,
Right.
you know, I
Yeah.
think it's easy for us to check
Yeah. Yeah.
very quickly, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not policing, but it's just the curiosity of knowing who's out there
Mm-hmm.
in the capacity to represent you, and possibly for you to champion.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think about even what you're talking about in alignment with the word protocol? I've also seen you in a film, a really short film from the Ontario Arts around protocols. Would you say that that's part of this protocol, the flexibility, the fluidity of protocols, that they're negotiable, that they're fluid and changing? Can you talk a little bit about your understanding of protocol?
Yeah, I mean, I think protocol is just respect for where you are, and recognizing that. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
significantly is common sense. And you know, you see when someone barges into a space and they have no business there, versus
Mm-hmm.
people who, you know, are doing the work, are participating, are building, or
Right.
nation building.
Yeah.
And you know, we see these people all over the place,
Right. Yeah.
and they disappear, not
Yeah.
so quickly, but they disappear to some extent. So I think protocol is important in terms of uh, positioning yourself wherever you choose to be,
Great. Yeah.
right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the nice thing about being in Toronto is, you know, we're still in Haudenosaunee territory.
Exactly.
So positioning myself
Yeah.
as a Mohawk person within the extent of the Western Door, you know, is makes it feel home.
Yeah. It's
Versus
interesting. Yeah.
you know, you're in Victoria, which is a whole other situation.
Exactly. And it has been a whole other situation, right? And
Yeah.
beautiful learning though over here, because territorially we're all politically in a different position, you know,
Mhm.
in this wave of decolonization, these waves that come forward where movement happens, transition happens, power dynamic shift. And it's, I think what you're talking about is really crucial for like I mentioned, faculty to be able to see the importance of self-location, the importance of acknowledging territory and following protocol. I think it enriches people's experience within the academy. It has the potential and possibility to expand your relationships, and really looking at that fundamental question of who is your community?
Yeah.
Who is your community that keeps you in a good place, in a good way? We use that term, but it's relationships.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the sort of like this protocol of land acknowledgement is key, because for so many, people didn't know whose territory they were on.
Exactly.
And I love hearing it. I'm very optimistic about it.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of people who are not for land acknowledgements.
Mm-hmm.
But what if there was none again?
Right.
What if that recognition disappeared again? So I'm excited when I walk by the Toronto sign and there's a medicine wheel. I like that City Hall has flags of Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Métis. Like, there's visible signs that I can recognize that, indicates like, okay, somebody understands that there's histories here, and the histories go deep.
Mm-hmm. I love that point that you're making, is because what it does is it contributes to the conversation that things are shifting and changing. I think too much of the criticism really kills and continues to erase some of the progress that we've been able to collaborate with institutions, organizations, academies. I think that there has been real work that has been done within the academy that extends to community. And so I really appreciate that optimism in this conversation, because I think more people need to speak this way, and people need to hear this.
Yeah.
I struggle with too much of the criticism, and I look to the other side. I'm like, but look at all these beautiful things that have actually happened. And so balancing the critique with the creativity,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these things have created opportunities for artists.
Yeah, true. Yeah. And each wave that we tackle politically comes another wave of transformative art. Like, I look at the TRC, the calls to action, every exhibition across the nation had reconciliation, and we're dealing with impacts of residential school and bringing that awareness forward. With Wet'suwet'en and Indigenous law being a very focal point right before COVID-19, globally, we were rallying as artists, as knowledge keepers in Brazil, Australia, all over, Indigenous cultures, artists in particular, really showing the visibility of who we are, who we've become, and that we are still here. So I appreciate that optimism in this conversation. And I guess the last question, or just something to reflect on, because I also wanted these conversations to feel like it was an opportunity for you to really touch base with what you've personally been reflecting on, in these times, in these moments, in particular with COVID-19, but how it's kind of challenged the arts in some ways tremendously. So maybe just some words on that, and we can have a closing.
Yeah, I guess the rush to support the arts, I'm cautious of, because what happens when this is over? Where's the money going to be to stimulate the creative culture back to its place?
Yeah.
What happens when all this money is being, or where did it come from, first of all?
Right.
Where did it come from, first of all, and it wasn't there before?
Yeah.
But what happens when, we're back to normal and they say, well, we spent all the money?
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
We spent all the money, we gave everybody support.
Yeah.
Where's the money to stimulate us getting back to recovery?
Exactly.
And I think that fits along reconciliation, because we now have to return back to whatever normal is, what we decide to do,
Right.
whether it's, we're a full-time artist, whether we're teaching in a classroom, whether we're having an exhibition opening in a gallery. There's all these things that we will need to afford to continue.
Right.
Survival is important and key for everyone to maintain, but like I'm not sure some things are necessarily. I think the reactions.
More reactions than really looking at long-term sustainability.
Yeah.
Like I think sometimes it diverges us from really thinking long-term when we see an immediate reaction as the solution. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and I think about this because how do we maintain our future going forward, especially when we have created such a momentum within our fields and practices?
Exactly.
How does that move forward without any disruption?
Right. Love it.
Because we don't expect being cut off from funding anymore.
Exactly.
So how do we move this forward?
I love that as a posing question to faculty who are going to be looking at this, for administrators and staff part of their organization and institutions, to take that exact question and deepen that, reflect on that, because if we are so much a part of Canadian history in this constructed of what Canada is, we need to be the leaderships of what that looks like for ourselves. Yeah. So I really appreciate your time. It was a big step for me to get out there, but I got a good list of people that have responded, and I'm really glad that I started with you. You've been an inspiration for me in my practice and my life. So I just wanted to say, Yawagoa for your time, and yeah.
On Yawagoa, and be safe. Wash your hands.
I will. You too. Okay, you take care.
Anna.
Okay, Anna. Okay. Oh boy. Recording.